Okay, it's preparing to live stream the meeting. We are live.
Okay.
Over to you, Pallavi and Giridhar sir.
Okay. So shall I start, Pallavi?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Good evening, fellow teachers, sirs and madams. Welcome to this webinar on of the English language enrichment course. Shall I start, Pallavi? So
Yes, please.
yeah, just a moment. Good evening, fellow. Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here. We are three speakers today. My name is Giridhar Rao. My colleagues are Pallavi and Pallavi Madam and Parthasarthi sir. All three of us are teachers at Azim Premji University in Bengaluru. We are all part of the language group and we're part of the team that has designed this, the materials for this course in collaboration with Telangana SCRT and department, of course, right? So as a part of this, the initial course, the English enrichment course, was meant for enrichment of teachers. Specifically, our target audience was adult learners, teachers, people like you and me, who are going to be teaching in English starting next academic year. But this session today is aimed at some general ideas about language acquisition, language learning, that we thought we could share with you as ideas, and hopefully you will be able to find them useful in the classroom in which you start teaching English. You have already begun teaching, I believe. Yes, that's right. So we are hoping that the inputs that we give today will form the basis or form part of your toolkit, part of the way you will take English into the classroom. For this, we have divided, for this webinar, we have divided our work into 3 parts. I will be doing the first part for about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, on general principles of language acquisition. I will tell you why I'm calling it language acquisition and not language learning. But to acquire language, the noun is acquisition. So language acquisition is what we will be talking about, the general principles, some general principles that I thought you will find useful wherever you are, in whichever classroom you are. My comments are primarily aimed at the elementary school level, yeah, but some of those can also be thought about for higher education, higher secondary and college as well. So I will do that part first. Then Parthasarthi sir will come in. He will introduce his topic and he will speak for about same 20-30 minutes. And then Pallavi madam will do a case study of actually transacting material, textbook material, NCRT or TWD material in a classroom, English classroom. So that is the broad plan that we have thought of for this session. I believe that this is being live streamed, so you are welcome to post your comments in the chat box, and we'll see how many we can take when the session is done. So one plan is that I finish my presentation and we have a 5-minute or 10-minute Q&A, and then Partha sir will make his presentation, and after another 5 or 10 minutes of Q&A, Pallavi madam will make her presentation. So that is that way the material covered in each of these sections of the presentation will be available freshly for discussion. Okay, so to start off, let me allow me to share my screen for a brief presentation that I have. Just a moment. Yeah. I think you should be able to see the screen. If there is a problem, please let us know. And Pallavi perhaps can also inform me if there is a problem. Right. So I have called these language learning principles, the slides that I'm going to share. But the first distinction I want to make, first point I want to make is that there is a difference between language acquisition and language learning. In the research on language education, this is a useful distinction to be made. In fact, languages are considered to be acquired. The first language acquired by the child in the socialized home environment is called the FLA. The study of that acquisition is called first language acquisition. So, for example, many of our children their FLA first language that they acquire will be Telugu. And the second language acquisition, SLA. In our case, since we are focusing on English, we will be talking about that. But the remarks I'm about to make are not just about English acquisition, although that is the focus, but generally a second language acquisition. What will enhance that process? What will help the second language acquisition, SLA? Why are we calling it acquisition? Because unlike learning, acquisition is defined as a gradual development of the language ability. Notice that this could be first language acquisition or second language acquisition. And how does this acquisition happen? It happens in communicative situations. Yes, it happens in contexts where you are trying to understand an input that someone is giving and trying to give an output of what responding to that person's communication. So it is a natural process which happens in context with other speakers, sometimes native speakers, sometimes quite often non-native speakers. So in our context, for example, in our school context, neither the learner nor the teacher are native speakers of English. They are native speakers perhaps of Telugu, perhaps of Kannada, perhaps of any other language, many other languages, right? So neither the teacher nor the learner are first language speakers, native speakers of that. For both of them are acquiring the language as a second language. But it's a natural process because that's the classroom language, that's perhaps the school language, that is the language that we want our children to learn, etc. Right? So communicative situations with other speakers, and it's a natural process of meaning making. Questions, answers, responses, right? Requests, fulfilling the request or saying that you cannot do it or whatever, any number of contexts of give and take, exchange of language. Yeah. And just as in real life, just as in a playground, you would see children doing a lot of things, a lot of activities involved using language, while using language. In the classroom too, this approach of language acquisition, of communicative approach, says that many activities need to be built into the acquisition process. They help the acquisition process. So it is not patient sitting just in one place and acquiring the language. Yeah. In contrast, language learning is a different process in the research literature. The research says that language learning is a much more conscious process. So this one, language acquisition, is not conscious in the same way. You don't learn rules in the playground. You learn rules about the games, of course, but not language rules, right? Here, on the other hand, in language learning, it's a more conscious process, and there is a steady accumulation of facts about language. This is how the past tense is made in Telugu. This is how the past tense is made in English. This is how the plural works for these words. This is how the active changes to passive, etc. As you know, that's a gradual accumulating of knowledge through analysis, right? Vocabulary and grammar, knowledge about these things is all part of language learning. So it's a far more self-conscious process, unlike the first language acquisition that we were talking about. That seems to be a much more natural, organic process. This one is often in a school setting, in an institutional setting, a school, a college, a learning center of some sort, right? So far more information about the language also in the process, in this language learning you're talking about, right? So for example, a good example might be that you can argue that mathematics is not acquired, it is learned. This is how the mathematical facts, mathematical procedures are learned. They are not acquired. Unlike language, which is through communicative situations with other speakers, right? There's a natural process of meaning making here. There's a conscious learning here. There are several conditions under which acquisition happens well. Favorable conditions for language acquisition. Yes. So many of those principles are have been consciously used. We were looking at the three of us, Partha sir, Palime madam, and I were looking at the textbooks, the kinds of lessons there are, the kinds of activities built into them, and we realized that many of the principles that we are talking about are actually being implemented in your textbooks, which is a very positive thing. So these are some of the favorable conditions that I thought I could summarize in the next, whatever, 10, 15 minutes that I have. The first and the foremost is exposure to interesting content. The content of the lesson has to be absolutely interesting. The more interesting, the better. And interesting, obviously, for the learner, for the target audience, right? So for example, you could say that the first sentence in the second bullet, is comprehensible. It is understandable. The cat sat on the mat. Okay, it's understandable. There is no particular word here, difficulty here as a statement, but it's not compelling. It becomes compelling when there is a story attached, which is the last bullet point on this slide. The cat on the mat saw a rat. Now suddenly there is a story. Kada tirigindi, as they say, right? So suddenly there is much more excitement, much more possibility of what will happen, right? So those are absolutely the necessary basis for developing content, that it has to be more, not just comprehensible. Comprehensible can be comprehensible and dull, no? Needn't be exciting, but comprehensible and compelling seems to be a very important condition for textbook content. Only then and only then will the learner actively engage with the content, right? And that active engagement, remember, as I will say in a moment or two, that active engagement need not be about speaking immediately. We'll come to that. But meanwhile, wherever possible, with this interesting, compelling input, wherever possible, many opportunities to speak about that are needed. The teacher will have to, the textbook creates those conditions by a very good illustration, by a illustration in which many things are happening, and the children notice different children notice different things and so on, right? But the teacher too actively thinks about what are the opportunities to use language that can be built around this content, whatever that content is. If it's a single picture, it's a single picture. If it's multiple pictures telling a story, that is. So in any case, the teacher creates the conditions in which the learner acquires the language by describing what is happening, by suggesting, by drawing attention to what is happening, by commenting on what is happening, all the various functions of language. Yeah. In this process, one more condition in India is an important one, namely that mixing of languages should be allowed, should not be prohibited at all. It looks as though children speak most naturally, first of all, in their own home language environment, but even in mixed language environments, they open up a great deal more than if they are told, don't speak or speak only in English. So the research indicates that mixing languages is not a problem. Allow the learner to mix languages. As an experienced teacher, you will know that slowly the proportion of L1 will come down and the proportion of L2 needs to increase. But there is no hurry about that. It is not something that can happen in a short span of time. Yeah. Maybe keywords need to be translated, nouns, adjective, verbs from English to Telugu, so that the action is clearer to the child about what is happening, about what it is called in English, how it is pronounced in English. Yeah. So that judicious mix, that intelligent mix of second language L2 and first language L1, intelligent, careful mixing of that is a good condition, is a favorable condition for second language acquisition. So it may be a good idea to allow it to happen, rather than insist on that the child speak, that the learner speak in the second language. Yeah. Also, this is also an interesting point, that listening is not a passive activity. Listening is actually quite an active activity, active practice that the child is doing or the learner is doing. So you don't need to put pressure on speaking from day one, right? Just listening to you, the teacher, speaking about the content in English is a process of active listening that the learner is undergoing. So if the content is interesting, not only is the listening active, but the speaking will happen, because no child can keep quiet, right? If it is something that is interesting to them, to the child, a visit to the zoo, for example, right? There is so much to say about such an activity, and that is precisely the reason why the first standard textbook has that visit to the zoo of the family, right? So in speaking, while speaking, just to come back to speaking, partial responses are fine. You don't need to insist on complete sentences from the learner. So if one word answer is possible and the child is comfortable with that one word answer, that too is part of language acquisition, because meaning has been made. That is the crucial condition we started with, right? That these are meaning making activities, a natural process of meaning making, we called it in an earlier slide. Yeah. So partial responses are fine. You don't need to insist on complete sentences coming out, right? Especially if your learners are slightly older, right? They need time to come out of their shyness. As you know, there is as children grow older, they become more and more self-conscious, especially teenagers, but even earlier, they become more and more self-conscious, and especially depending on who else is in the room, right? So to bring them out of shyness, you need to give them time. So a silent period when they are not being forced to speak and seeing others speaking, they themselves open up. Now, as you know, all of you know from our ELEC program for teachers, this is exactly what has been happening. Teachers who did not speak at all on day 1 and day 2 began opening up on day 3 and day 4. And by day 5, people had to tell them, please stop talking, right? Because there is so much to say, so much to share. So children are no different. So once the shyness is overcome, they will open up. Of course, for younger children, they have much less shyness, far fewer inhibitions. So they will open up anyway. But for older learners, there is something called the affective filter, which functions as a sort of inhibitory mechanism in the child, because the child is afraid of how the child might be judged by peers, by teachers, by others. So as the child grows older, the affective filter becomes stronger and stronger. So it needs more work to make the classroom a safe space, a friendly place, right? Where children can open up. Yes, it is affective filter, which I'm calling shyness. You can call it inhibition. Yes, how teachers address it through making the language classroom a friendly space. And that friendly space includes things like mixing languages, allowing other languages to come in, asking children, how would you say this in your own language? How would you express this in your own way? So multiple ways of reducing the affective filter, of weakening the affective filter, because it's a filter. And affective means here emotions. So it's a filter for emotions. Because the child is becoming self-conscious, there is a hesitation to express themselves. And that comes through in being quiet in the language classroom. There are, as we know as teachers, multiple ways of addressing this. One other important aspect of reducing the affective filter, weakening the affective filter, overcoming the affective filter, is minimum error correction. As little as possible. The idea being that these errors will get corrected by themselves. These are children learners who will model their language on the teacher. So once they hear the teacher saying the correct form, the grammatically acceptable, the standardized form of the language, they will begin to use it because they imitate the teacher. So it looks like in many studies, it has been shown that one does not need to do a lot of error correction for children at all. These are self-correcting processes, especially in a classroom where many opportunities for expressing are available. The further realization is the last bullet point on this slide, namely that errors are a natural part of language acquisition, both in FLA, first language acquisition, as well as SLA, second language acquisition. For example, we know quite well in India, children learning to say eated, and then learning to say that, no, it's the past tense is ate, making a plural women's, and then realizing that, oh, it already is a plural without the S in this case, right? So these overgeneralizations, as they are called, coming from other examples, talked, eated, seems logical to the child, right? So these are halfway points. And they are a common part of first language acquisition as well. We all know the typical errors that children make in their mother tongue as they are learning the mother tongue. Very young children make very characteristic errors. And with some of those errors, they all disappear. All those errors disappear. Similarly, with second language acquisition, it looks like constant error correction is not needed. These are self-correcting processes. With a little help, obviously, you're facilitating it in the classroom, but you need not be over conscious about the errors your children make. They are a normal part of language acquisition. So finally, these seem to be the essential conditions that help the second language acquisition. Yeah? The first is easily compelling input. By and large, the most important condition seems to be that the story has to be interesting, that whatever is happening has to be compelling, right? A second part seems to be that in a country like India, understanding the story multilingually is a good strategy. Children learn to map language and reality across languages quite fast. So this is a great way of using the multilingualism that the child is coming with as a resource rather than considering it a problem. Similarly, when the child is speaking, especially, let the child be multilingual in their engagement with the story. So speaking multilingually about the story is a good practice in a classroom with minimum error correction, because the excitement of wanting to say what the child wants to say often does not allow bandwidth, doesn't allow space in the head to actually monitor whether I'm saying it grammatically or not. This happens to us also in the excitement, in the heat of the moment. We often don't pay very much attention to grammatical form, right? So similarly with children learning a second language. And the last but one, no pressure to produce complete sentences. A few one-word answers are enough to start gaining confidence that I know I have understood and I have communicated that I have understood to whoever is listening, the teacher or other children in the classroom, right? And finally, none of this, any look at children playing in a playground, you know that language and activity go together intimately. So it seems to be a very important part to think through what are the multiple activities, language activities that I can build into the teaching of this story, where physically, a total physical response, the total body is involved in language acquisition. So I thought I would share these few ideas with you and hope that you will be able to take some of them, find some of them useful in your classroom as well. I will stop here, and we have 5 minutes more, in which perhaps if there are any questions in the chat box, I can take those. A substantial number of colleagues have joined, fellow teachers. I'm so happy. అందరికీ నమస్కారం అండి. Well, if there aren't any
Giri, can you hear
immediate
me?
questions, perhaps we can move on, and Partha sir can start his presentation, and we can come back to questions and queries later after Pallavi madam's presentation towards the end. How does that sound, Partha, Pallavi?
Yes, sure. That sounds great.
Okay. So Partha sir, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Giri.
You're welcome. Please go ahead. Do say a couple of words about yourself, Partha, and then start.
Hello, good evening. It's nice to be here today addressing the teachers who have been teaching English at the primary level. Some of you are quite experienced. You have been teaching for a pretty long time. You know your children. You know your textbooks. You have your own methodology. And you have been doing it quite nicely, I'm sure. Then the question comes, then why are we here? We are here just to explore the possibilities of teaching English to our children, many of whom come from the disadvantaged section of the society. Many of them are first generation learners. For majority of our children, you, the teacher, is the only supplier of English. They have nobody at home who can speak English, who can support them in learning English. The exposure to English, whatever English they have, it is from you. And that's why you are the savior. You can create a happy world for the children. You can create a dangerous world for the children. After all, English is neither your mother tongue nor my mother tongue. English is neither the mother tongue of your children nor your mother tongue. And that's why we are on the same boat. And how best we can make out of this situation, that's our concern. I am Parthasarathi Misra. I teach the Ajimbram University, Bangalore. During my long association with ELT, English Language Teaching, I have been associated with primary teachers, secondary teachers, college teachers, university teachers, and wherever I go, I have only one mantra: to teach English better. And English is my language. That is, for speaking English, I don't need anybody's permission. I did not ask the Queen of England that, well, I am going to teach English. It is as much our language, it is as much our heritage as it is the heritage of anybody in this world. English is a global resource. And how best we can teach, this is the That's the question. I have a small PPT. Let me see if I can share it. Let me try. Is it visible?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. And maybe you can just make it full screen, but even then, even if you don't do that, that's fine.
Oh, no, I'll do it full screen. And the topic of my presentation is using the textbooks for teaching English. Do we need textbooks? Now, for learning our mother tongue as children, we had no textbooks. When a child starts speaking the mother tongue, no mother hands over a textbook to the child and says, "Look, my child, this is a Telugu textbook, and I will teach you language." The child learns language from the environment, from other sources. But in our schools, we are using textbooks, and sometimes we are so obsessed with textbooks that we forget the basic principles of language acquisition about which Giri was discussing for last half an hour. That's why I would like to request all the teachers not to be too obsessed with English textbooks. I'm sure I'm not making a very revolutionary statement, but I am not very fond of textbooks, because whatever language I learned initially informally, just like all of you. Now, you see, moving from my world to my English world. My English world is the name of the textbook series. That what's the difference between my world and my English world? Can anybody tell me? What's the difference between my world and my English world? Very simple question. My world has 2 words. My English world has 3 words. And English comes in between my and world. And that makes that significant. That how can we make the transitions from the home language of the child to English as a target language in an anxiety-free environment? Because we can't learn a language if we are tense, if we are full of anxiety. You can't teach a language to a child by pointing a gun to the child that speak English, otherwise I will shoot you. No, language can be taught only to love, only to empathy, only by identifying yourself with the children. And that's why we know our children, especially in the schools where we teach in Telangana, that they come from societies, they come from backgrounds in which they speak a number of languages, some of which are endangered languages. And when they come to school and they find that, well, my language has no place here. Nobody speaks my language. And my world is lost. This sense of loss affects the child psychologically. And when you are disturbed psychologically, no amount of preaching, no amount of good words, high-sounding words will work. And that's why, how do we make transitions from the home language to the English? That is, from the known to the unknown. Now the child, when the child comes to school, the child knows a lot of things. The child knows, for example, the child knows a number of words which are originally from English. Bus, table, fan, mobile. Name at least 50 words Any child coming from the remotest non-descript village of Telangana will know a number of English words. Now, can you start with that? Can you start with those words? They may pronounce these words differently. They may not pronounce these words like bus, table, pen, fan, ball, cricket, like the Britishers. They may not say cricket, they may say cricket. They may not say table, they may say table. No problem. But these words are known to them. And as a teacher, my first task is to make them comfortable. That's why whenever you have the textbook, look at those words which are already known to the children. Look at those experiences which are known to the children and build on that, those words, build on those experiences. Because while I was thinking of this presentation, I was thinking of not to tell you how to teach. I thought of telling you how not to teach. I hope you understand the difference between how to teach and how not to teach. Please don't go to a class and start writing the words on the board. Please don't go to a class and tell them, look, today we will learn these words. Well, isolated words don't have any meaning, any sense, any importance to the child. Why should I learn some unknown words if I don't find any meaning in using them? Go, come, sit here, all those things. If I don't see any reason, I won't. A child won't utter these words. Out of fear, the child may utter, but child will forget. That's why we should see to it the child finds a meaning in what he or she does with English. The child should realize that, well, these are the words which help me to convey my meaning better. And this is one point. Another point is that I would like to request you to look at the preface of the textbooks. Now I am quoting from the preface, My English World, published by the government of Telangana. I have marked 3 expressions. One is holistic approach, integrated, and children's knowledge and experience. The primary textbooks are prepared on a holistic approach to language learning. Now, what do we mean by holistic approach? And then again, there's a question of integrated. That is, listening, speaking, reading, writing, thinking, these should not be taught in isolation. That, well, today I will utter some words, you will listen. Tomorrow you will speak. Next day you will read. And next day you will write. No, this should not be done. We should present the target language in its totality, holistic, that the child should be able to use language for expression. We should not compartmentalize listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I think the greatest harm to language teaching, especially English teaching, has been done with this LSRW. As if they come one after another. Certainly not. We should not teach like that. We should teach them in a holistic manner. That is, we should teach all these skills together. Holistic means everything the child needs to acquire to communicate in English effectively. The purpose of using a language is to communicate, either orally or in writing. Now, in order to communicate effectively, the child should be able to listen first, listen, comprehend, understand, and then respond. If I ask a child, stand up, and if the child sits down, what does it mean? That the child is unable to comprehend the meaning. Give me a book. I ask the child, give me a book, and child gives me a pen. It means the child could not get the message. And therefore, we should teach the material, we should use the material prescribed in the textbook in such a way that the child gets enough opportunities of communicating in English effectively, meaningfully, joyfully, and not mechanically. And this brings us to the question of integrating these 4 skills. And along with these skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, comes the question of thinking. Because we are teaching English to human beings, to children who are capable of thinking. They are not robots. They are not parrots. There is no point in just asking them in memorizing, repeating, drilling English words and rhymes and sentences. How do you do? I am fine, thank you. How do you do? I am fine, thank you. Not that. When you ask the child, how do you do? The child should realize that he is to respond in a meaningful context. Because this meaning making is important. While we learn a language, we are not at all interested in other individual words, grammar, sentences like that. We are interested in meaning. This is the natural, normal way of learning a language. When I go to a market and I speak a language which is not my mother tongue, my objective is to convey the meaning. My objective is to tell the shopkeeper that I want this, I want that. Meaning making. Same thing should happen so far as learning English is concerned. The child should find a meaning in your classroom, meaning of using English in your classroom. And for that, if you go to the learning outcomes, which are there very much in your textbooks, I think it will help you a lot. Just to, as I have hardly 15 minutes left, I will concentrate on learning outcomes for class 1. You see, the learning outcome for class 1 does not tell us that we should know what happens to Amu and her family, what happens when Amu goes to school. The content is not at all important. Here you see all these learning outcomes. I have used different color codes. You see, listens and responds, listens to English words and greetings, polite forms, carries out simple instructions. All these are with reference to listening and responding, listening and speaking. And then you find that the child reads words graphically, reads orally, that is, those are reading, then draws pictures, writes the names, writes legibly, writes simple words like father, mother, book, pencil, fan, dog, rat, bus, and other words which are available in the immediate context of the child. Now, we have to use the unit 1 or unit 2, unit 3, whatever it may be, with reference to these learning outcomes. Do you remember the story that you read in your class 1 Telugu textbook? How many of you remember all the poems which you read in your Telugu textbooks in class 1 or class 2? No need. But you remember how we acquired that language, the written form of the language, the polite form of the language. You learned how, you realized how the kind of Telugu that you speak at home is different from the standard variety of Telugu which is used in formal situations. You learned how to use language which is appropriate to a particular context. Same thing happens to English. That's why we should use the textbook as a means to an end. Textbook is a means to an end. Textbook is not the final thing. We use the textbook to help the child to acquire these learning outcomes. And that's why my request to all the teachers is that please have a look at the learning outcomes of each unit and design your pedagogical practices with the help of the text. Say in unit 1, you have Amu and her family going to school, Amu's school, Amu and her friends, things they do at the zoo, and fruits and vegetables. And then you have the story time. Now you use these materials, but don't lose sight of these outcomes, because our objective is to help the child to acquire these, to achieve these learning outcomes, these competencies. And as Giri was mentioning in this presentation, that exposure to the target language. One of the reasons why our children don't find the English textbooks difficult is that they don't have any exposure to English except the textbook. Think of the mother tongue. When we learned our mother tongue in the schools, we had the textbook. And in addition to textbook, we have the whole world around us in which our mother tongue was used. And that's why it was quite easy. But in the English classroom, what happens? We are so obsessed with the textbooks that we read those sentences. We force the children to read those sentences. We explain the meaning and we give the answers. They write the answers. They answer in the examination, they write those answers, give marks, and even after getting 90 out of 100, children are unable to read simple sentences, unable to write simple sentences, unable to communicate in English. And therefore, I would like to refer to only 3 aspects. One is picture reading, storytelling, and story reading. Now, picture reading. What do you mean by picture reading? Now, this is the picture. This is from class 5 textbook. In this picture reading, how do we read pictures? If you have a picture, then this picture is a great starting point for discussion. You can initiate a discussion. And of course, that discussion will be in English. And in addition to English, wherever possible, the mother tongues of the children or your mother tongue, because as Giri pointed out, that we should not be too obsessed with English only, because there is a question of transition. Now, pictures. Pictures, every picture tells a story. We respond to a picture depending on our previous knowledge, our exposure, and our state of mind. Therefore, any kind of picture can be used to generate talk. The language classroom should be full of talk. Teachers should talk, children should talk, talking. We learned our mother tongue only by talking. And that's why don't stop the child while the child tries to talk, tries to speak in English. And any picture, it may be pictured in advertisements, it may be newspapers, magazines, calendars, stamps, labels, posters, everything. In English textbooks also, you have English textbooks class 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every unit, each unit starts with pictures. And you can make a collection of these resources for classroom transaction. If you collect those pictures and prompt them to discuss, to respond to those pictures. Initially, they will try to speak both in English and the mother tongue. Let them do it. You supply the English equivalent. Help, help. For example, this picture, help, help. And you see that what happened. Now, you can let them respond. Let them say whatever they like. Don't discourage them. Because there are different ways in which we can use pictures. For example, finding. Ask children to find out things in the picture. What are there in the pictures? What do you see in the picture? What is happening in the picture? For example, there is a tree. A boy climbing a tree. You ask, who is climbing a tree? Or some girls playing, or some girls using bicycles. You know, and what are the girls doing? That is, prompt them to find facts from the picture, and it will involve them. They will forget the language. They will be more interested in the pictures. And the moment they are interested in the picture and they forget what language they are using, you will see that they start using English without knowing that they are using English. Then next is reasoning. Ask children to think about the picture. Guess. For example, why is the child in the picture crying? If the child is there's a picture of a child crying. Why is the boy climbing the tree? That will develop the thinking skill. And while developing a thinking skill, it will help them to acquire the language, the linguistic skill also. Or ask the children to relate the picture by placing themselves in it. Encourage them to project themselves into an imaginary situation. Suppose you look at this picture of the two boys. And what would you see? Supposing, or you see, what would you have done if you were one of the boys? If you were, or there's a picture and there is a boy in the there is a picture of a forest and there is a boy. You ask the question: if you were present in the forest shown in the picture, how would you spend the night in that forest? Let them position themselves in that situation, let them start thinking and let them respond. Or predicting, encourage the children to talk about what might have happened. Next, with reference to the picture shown in the pictures. Now, for example, there's a train and there is a boy. Question may be, what will the boy do when he gets down from the train shown in the picture? This is the way in which you can use picture reading. You can, with the help of picture, you can prompt them to speak. And the other is this question of relating. That is, you ask them to relate, encourage the children to think about the situation which is similar to the situation shown in the picture. Does the picture remind you of a similar incident? Or for example, there is a picture which tells you the story of a girl who saved her brother from an accident. Did you read a similar story? Do you know any story which is similar to this story? And children will come up with different answers. And this is a way in which we can use picture reading to generate discussion. And then how can we use different themes of a textbook for integrating listening, speaking, reading, and writing in an integrated manner? How can we do it? For example, as I said, in the class 1 textbook, you have Amu and her friend and family and going to school. Now, these are the themes. And now, how can you just prompt them to listen to the text to respond to the text, to read the text, to write simple words, expressions, sentences, and start thinking. Thinking, learning a language, and thinking should go together. And therefore, sum it up, I would just repeat that you have the learners, you have the learning outcomes, you have the textbook, and you have the pedagogical processes. The learners are at the center. Our primary concern is with the learners, that they should learn. And what should they learn? Well, that is specified in the learning outcomes. And then how do I use the learning outcomes? Well, there is a textbook which gives the material. And I should relate that learning outcomes with the textbook. Well, with the help of this particular story, today, I will teach them how to ask questions and how to respond. Well, today I have the lesson fruits and vegetables, and I can prepare a situation of market, for example, market in which some children will sell fruits and some children will sell vegetables and some children will buy vegetables, and what kind of conversation goes on. And as a teacher, I should scaffold, I should help them to use English in that particular situation. Context. It is the context that is important. Please don't teach language without any context, because language does not exist without any context. I am now speaking English. I am talking to you in a particular context. Similarly, when in the classroom also, create the situation. Please create the environment, create the context with the help of the textbook. Go beyond the textbook. Don't be imprisoned. Don't be a prisoner of textbook. Use other materials, whichever is available. Newspapers, magazines, labels, advertisements. So many things are available. Even in a remote village also, you will find wrappers, the biscuit packets. Something is written in English and Telugu both. Use that. Give them the exposure to the target language. A resourceful teacher can do wonder. And all of you are resourceful teachers, and I'm sure that you won't be a prisoner of textbooks. You will use the textbook as a means to an end. The textbook will help you to help the children in achieving the learning outcomes. And that should be I think if you design some activities, some pre-reading activities, pre-reading means that before introducing a particular lesson, you use those activities to give the exposure to the target language, and then you start the textbook. I think I should stop now. It is 6:28. If there's any question, I don't know whether in the chat box there is any question or not.
No, there isn't any question, Partha, from your talk. So we can just move on to Pallavi. And if there are any queries later, we can take those.
Yeah, thank you all. Let me stop. I'm stopped sharing. Over to Pallavi.
Thank you so much, Parthasarathy sir. Thank you so much, Giridhar sir. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pallavi. I teach at the School of Education of Azim Premji University. I teach language education there. And today in the session, we started, Giridhar sir started the session by talking about certain principles and principles that one should keep in mind, general principles that one should keep in mind when we engage with language teaching and learning. And Parthasarathy sir next then move on to discuss what should not be done in classroom situations. So he said that probably it's not a good idea to give students a list of words, vocabulary items along with their meanings, and let them just cram that list up. He also spoke about certain things that can be done in classrooms, such as picture reading. How do you engage with that? How do you, in your textbooks, there are many pictures that are given. How do you deal with that in classrooms? So I am going to focus more on what can be done and take an example of a text from a textbook. I'm going to start share my screen, and we can then see what we can do when we have a text like this. So this text is from My English World. It's the English textbook for class 5th, which you have been using. I have chosen this poem. It is given on page number 18 of the textbook. It is called The Best of Friends. So we can perhaps in the rest of the discussion that I have, I'm going to reflect on what can be done when you come across a poem like this. All right. Yeah. So one of the things that you can do, the poem is about friendship. So one of the things that you can do and you must do before you take a text into a classroom is that you go through it several times. You think, you make a plan on how to teach it. You familiarize, make sure that you yourself are familiar with all nuances of the text. And then it is probably a good idea to start with a pre-reading activity. In a pre-reading activity for a text like this, you can perhaps just start with questions like, this text is about friendship, as I said. You can perhaps start with a question like, do you have friends at school? Do you have friends at home? Children, when they respond to it, they might not be able to respond to the question in English. As Giridhar sir mentioned, and also Parthasarthi sir mentioned, it is okay if they respond in their home languages as well. That should be acceptable. Try to encourage them to speak as much English as possible. You can also ask them questions like, do you like spending time with your friends? What activities do you do with your friends? So students, your children might want to share some of the games that they play with their friends. So doing an activity like this is very simple. It seems like you're just asking some general questions on around that text which you're going to engage with in a bit. But doing such an activity is very, very important, especially because it transports the child into a space where the child begins thinking about the theme of the text which she or he is going to read. So the theme is in this poem is about friendship. So the child is already thinking about, I have those friends, or that friend I just had a fight with, or that friend of mine I love to play that game with. So the child is already in that mind space where the child is thinking about her own lived experiences. And once you have done that, these are also called advanced organizers. Once you have got children thinking about the theme, then you can perhaps move on to the text. Another thing that you can do before you move on to a text is perhaps you can design an activity like this. So let's look at the text first. When we read it, we come across certain words like frown, which our children might not be familiar with. Words like trials. Maybe our students don't know what, we know that our students might not know what it means. And lend a hand, the word lend. So you might come across, you already have some idea, you know your students, you have some idea about which are the words that the child might struggle with. So instead of, when you're reading the poem or reading the text, instead of at that point of time stopping and describing what that word means, you can perhaps also deal with it in the beginning before you get to the text. So let's choose the word trials here and lending a hand. Your little, the best of friends will understand your little trials and lend a hand. So if you want to discuss the word trial with students, maybe it's a good idea to ask the children to look at this picture, which is given in the textbook itself. There are many other pictures as well, which you can use. Picture like this, Parthasarthi sir has already given you some ideas on how you can use it. And then using these pictures, this picture that I've taken is also given in the textbook. So when you draw your children's attention to this picture, you can just ask them, what do you think is happening in this picture? And your students might say, oh, this girl has perhaps fallen, or perhaps this girl is ill, and the girl in blue is helping the other girl. Maybe they are friends. This one, the girl in blue, is smiling and she's helping this other girl which seems to have fallen. So when your students give you such explanations, it is a good point where you can give, where you can introduce them to a new vocabulary item, such as the words that we chose, such as the words which are already there in the text, word like trial. So when you have this discussion, you can tell students, yes, when your friend is in difficulty, is facing a trial in their life, you must help them. You must lend your hand to your friend. So that is one way in which you can introduce certain vocabulary items. However, you do not stop there. I'm going to give you some more examples on how you engage deeply with these words. So let's go ahead. So once you have engaged your students with such activities, once you have already made them start thinking about their own experiences of friendship, once you've taken them to the space where they're thinking about the theme of the text, then you can start reading the text. The first reading should always be done by you, the teacher, without stopping in between to explain anything. So this is the poem, The Best of Friends. You read it, take pauses, use intonation, proper intonation, make sure you're reading slowly for students to follow, but don't explain in the middle on the during your first read. Let them experience the poem. So there are rhymes here, this text, there's a lot of text. Your students might not be able to understand it. Your students might not be able to understand all the words which are given here, but let them just experience this poem. And then once you've done it, it's a good idea to then again go through the poem. So you read it. The best of friends can change a frown to a smile when you feel down. And when you read it again, that's probably a good point of time to deal with a word like this. Can change a frown. What does frown mean? A friend can change a frown into smile, and then just show them what it means. What do you think frown is? Frown means, and your friends, when you're feeling like this, when you're feeling down, your friends can change it into a smile and show them what smile is, and then just move on. The best of friends will understand your little trials and lend a hand. Here again, you've already introduced them to the word trials. You've already used the word lend in the pre-reading activity that you did. So this is a good point where you can just say your little trials, your little difficulties that you face in life, your friends lend their hand to you at that point of time. They offer you help. Moving ahead, you read the rest of the poem. The best of friends will always share your secret dreams because they care. You also share your dreams perhaps with your friends. You also care for your friends. The best of friends worth more than gold. Give all the love a heart can hold. Friends are very important. They're more important than gold. You love them, don't you? So just while you are not explaining each and every word which has occurred in which has been used in the text, and you're also not giving them meaning, line by line meaning of the whole text, but you're giving them some experience of the text. You're helping them comprehend. You're helping them by, when you did the pre-reading activity, you introduce them to certain vocabulary items. Those meanings are still there in their head. They're using those to interpret this text. And then once you finish, I suggest that you can just ask, divide your class into pairs and ask them to read the poem again by themselves. So students sitting in pairs and they're reading. So in case one is struggling, the other one could help. At the same time, I do not suggest that you ask the students to read the whole text line by line. So one student reads the best of friends, the next student stands up and read the next line, and this next student stands up and reads the next. What happens when you ask students to do that? When you ask students to read a text like that, do you think that facilitates comprehension? Think about the time. I would like you to think about the times when somebody told you a story. Let's say when your grandmother told you a story. And what if your mother said one line and then your grandmother said another line and then somebody else said another line? And this is exactly what what happens in classroom when you ask students to read a story aloud line by line. In the middle of it, children are also standing, opening their textbook, sitting down, and the meaning of the story is lost. Whatever comprehension that could have happened if the text was read to the students properly, even that doesn't happen because there were so many breaks. So perhaps it's a good idea for you to read the whole text to the students so that they have some experience with it, and then let them read it themselves. And once they have finished this reading for the third time, you can also ask them to read it a couple of more times. And then when they finish them, always ask a very, very basic question. It sounds very basic, but again, it's a very important question. Simple question like, do you like the poem or do you like the story? What did you like or not like about it? Now, when you ask such a question, you're essentially encouraging the children to, again, think about how they felt when they read the text. So you're asking for an aesthetic response to literature. Literature is not just for language teaching. It is also, you read a novel and you start crying at certain points of time. You read a novel and one of the characters is going through a tough phase and your heart starts beating thug, 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 because you feel for that that protagonist or for that character. You put yourself in the place of that character. So I would suggest that you encourage your students also to see how they feel with respect to the text. So asking a simple question like, what do you like? Do you like the poem? What do you like in it? What do you not like in it? Do you like the story? What do you like about it? Is enough. Would encourage that kind of question, would encourage them to think about their own experiences, it would encourage them to reflect on the text itself. And then once you've done that, you can move to the questions that are given in the textbook as well. So a question like, why does the author say that friends are more important than gold? So here is a good time to introduce all such questions and then let students work on it, perhaps in groups. If they're using their home languages, that's all right. Let them just engage with it. Now, the second part of my presentation, in this part, I'm going to focus specifically on how to deal with vocabulary. So Parthasarathi sir told you that it is not a good idea to provide them with a list of words and their meanings. And I'm sure I've seen in many classrooms, teachers do that. And then students sit there holding their textbook, just cramming up the whole list. And what happens is that after a point of time, they just forget those words. Because they haven't engaged with those deeply. Those words never become a part of their everyday life. So one of the things that you must do in your classrooms as teachers is ensure that your students are engaging deeply with at least some words, if not all, some words. So let's say in a text, you have just moved to an English medium, English medium instruction, and in the text, maybe there are several words which you think that your students might not be familiar with. Then how do you deal with those words? Do you introduce students to all those words? Or do you select a few words and spend some time discussing the few? I would suggest that you do the latter, that you select only a few words and spend some time, ensure that your students are engaging deeply with those words so that they become a part of their everyday vocabulary. So in this poem, I've selected these words. was like frown, trial, worth, and secret. So once you've finished reading and having those discussions around the questions, these questions related to the text, maybe you can give them this list. Your lists can be slightly bigger than this, 5 words, 6 words, but not more than that. Your list can also, in a text, you can just decide to focus as a teacher, you can decide to focus on only 2 words. So today, these are the 2 words which I'm going to focus upon. How do you select those 2 words? There are 2 things that you should keep in mind. First is that these words should be useful to them. So this word is there in the text, but I know that it would, if my students learn this word, they'll be able to use it in different contexts. Second is that they might come across that word in different other texts. So here's a word. It has occurred only once in this whole text that I'm going to deal with in classroom today, but my students might come across this word in when they're learning EVS as well. A word like deforestation. My students might come across this word when they're watching this video, which I'm going to show in let's say in the next class. At this point of time, then it is a good point where you can ensure that you have certain discussion where you can introduce your students to that vocabulary. So here I've chosen these words like frown, trial, word, secret. Now, what do you do with these words? Once you have chosen them, give them a list. Frown means ... Trail means this. Trial means this. Worth means this. Secret means that. Perhaps not. So, as I said, you should ensure that you engage deeply with these words. Let us take an example of the word frown. First of all, you can encourage students point to the text itself. Where did that word occur? Let the students read first 2 lines that occur before that word and the 2 lines that follow that word. You can ask them to guess, predict in the meaning of that particular word. Here you already, when you were reading the text, you showed what a frown is. You showed them, you did that. You frowned. So they have some idea. Some of your students might remember what a frown is. So you point to the place where the word occurred in the text, and then you can do activities like this. You can ask students to show me how you frown. In which situations do you frown? Would you frown when your mother asks you to eat jackfruit? Or you can use any vegetable which children do not usually like, and you can use the name of that vegetable in their home language and say, do you frown when your mother cooks that for you? Some of them might say yes, some of them might say no. And then you can also engage them in an activity like this, where you give the word and you can ask them, what does this word mean? What do you think this word might mean? Could it mean I don't like this? Now that students already know that you frown when you make a face like this, they might say that yes, it shows that I don't like something. Does frown mean that I am feeling good? You don't do like this when you're feeling good, right? So your students, because they can relate the word to that gesture, they might understand already that it doesn't represent a feeling which is good. I'm feeling bad. Yes, I'm feeling angry. Perhaps I'm enjoying this. Certainly not. You don't frown when you're enjoying something. Now, when you do an activity like this, you're essentially equipping students, giving them exposure to different nuances of this particular word. And then once you have done this, you can also ask them to fill complete sentences like these. Such sentences are also given in textbooks as well. I frown when my friend dash, and let the students complete it. So you divide them into groups and ask everyone to complete this sentence. I frown when my friend, give an example yourself. I frown when my friend hits me. I can ask Giridhar sir to give an example. He can complete this sentence for himself. I frown. Yes, sir. Would you like to complete the sentence? When do you frown?
I frown when I'm hungry.
Oh. Parthasarathy sir, would you also like to complete the sentence?
Yeah, I frown when I don't get what I want.
Interesting. So like that, you can ask all your students, make them sit in groups, ask all your students to complete this sentence. Now they already know that frowning is a negative feeling, and they can put in all the instances, the situations where they frown, where they don't feel good. It might happen that in your class, they might not be able to use, complete this sentence in such a way that it is grammatical. They might end up using some words from their home languages. And as I said, as I've been saying, that should be acceptable. Let them engage with the concept that this word represents. So after you've done all these activities, after your students have engaged with the word in such an in-depth manner, then you can ask them to come up with a definition for themselves. So you can again make them sit in groups and ask them to fill in this sentence. Frown means, and let them complete the sentence, what it means to them. And because they're sitting in groups, they'll have some peer support. They'll be able to help each other, and they'll be able to define the word. Frown means not feeling good, acceptable. Frown means sad, acceptable. And little later, as you engage more with the word, you can perhaps go on refining the meaning to the extent that it resonates with the definition which is given in dictionaries as well. So likewise, you can engage students with other words as well. Words like secret, trial, worth. With a word like secret, you can ask students, which of the following things would you like to keep secret from your friend? Your name, would you like to keep it secret? No, you tell your name to everyone. Your nicknames, the names that the funny name that your mother calls you by, or your father uses for you, would you like to share it with everyone? Many of them would start giggling and sharing. You might have to give them a lot of support. It would also involve creating an environment in the class where whatever students say should be acceptable to you. So even if they're saying something funny and they're laughing, you laugh with them. You let them laugh. Having the control as a teacher is, all the time is not necessary. Let them engage with the word, with the concepts, and then take it forward from there. Would you share a naughty thing that you did with your friend? Sometimes, yes, sometimes when I do naughty things, I don't like to share it with my mother. She scolds me. So I share it with my friend. So these are, some other interesting ways in which you can deal with vocabulary. Now, we're not giving them a list of words and their definitions that they have to memorize by rote. When they memorize words by rote, they might reproduce it at that instant, but those words never become a part of their everyday vocabulary. However, when they've engaged with the word in such an in-depth manner, they might be able to, there are more chances that the word would become a part of their everyday vocabulary. They will be able to use it in their everyday lives to, represent their feelings. So yes, I'd like to stop here, and perhaps if we have some questions, we can all take questions at this point of time. Yeah.
Thank you, Pallavi.
So if you have any, yes, sorry.
There aren't any questions in the chat box, but So we needn't wait for that. You can stop sharing the screen if you.
Yes. Yes. So if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box on YouTube, and then we can take it up. I think we'll wait for a few, let's say 1 minute. And
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. I hope, will there be anyone who will frown when the session is over?
Yes, please.
This is the way in which, you can you remember a word forever if you use the word in a particular context.
So I like the fact that although the three of us made our presentations independently and one after the other, there were several themes that were running through quite strongly. And perhaps one of the most important was context, that words come with contexts, and language learning, language acquisition then is a process of acquiring the context as well, and the ecosystem of that word. Yes. There is a question asking, please explain graphic reading. Did any of us mention graphic reading? I did not.
No, I think in a PPT, the word was used, I think, correct?
I see.
Would you like to explain it?
Well, in the context of reading an image, that is, I think, one of the things you had in mind, namely that when a picture is shown, a whole story is being portrayed. And language acquisition crucially depends on being able to tell the story. What is happening in this picture? Who is talking to whom?
I use the word, I think I use the sentence, every picture tells a story. Whenever there is any pictures, a picture has something to say. And that's why we look at the picture, depending on our situation, circumstances, background, prior knowledge, we interpret it. You find a cross, you cross. A cross, what does it mean? A cross, if I am a doctor, immediately it will remind me of the Red Cross. If I am a religious person, it crosses a different meaning. If I am a maths teacher, it reminds me of plus. And this is the way in which it depends on the graphic image is interpreted in different ways. And that again brings us to the question of context. A word has no meaning at all.
Without
a word gets its meaning from the context. And that's what I think Pallavi was pointing out. The frowning, frowning is a negative emotion only because it is used in a negative context, in that particular context. Now it is one point that emerged, that all the three presentations, they had their inner link, that the language should be taught in a context. Language should be introduced in a context, and we should not, otherwise it becomes a very mechanical way of teaching language, and that's why the children find it difficult. And another point is for teachers, it's a heavy responsibility. For each lesson, if I am to prepare activities like that, for each word, important words, if I have to prepare the sentences and activities as Pallavi has prepared, it takes a lot of time. And that's why, teaching, I think, is a very hazardous task, the profession, where we have to invest a lot of time and energy. And I hope all the teachers, I don't know what is the total number now attending, all the teachers attending this webinar will spare their valuable time in designing activities pre-reading activities, while reading activities, and post-reading activities. And then I think teaching will be fun. Learning will be fun only when teaching is fun for the teachers. Let the teachers enjoy teaching. Children will enjoy learning automatically.
So please don't frown.
Yeah.
So I think those are wise words to end the session with Partha and Pallavi. So I would also like to add my thanks to the teachers who have all taken the trouble to time to join us today. Pallavi, do you want to say something and then we can close?
Yeah, just I'd also like to add my thanks, my note of thanks. Thank you so much for joining today, and we would be, I'm sure, would be engaging in several more discussions with you on how to engage in more effective ways with language education.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.